The line was not drawn on any star. It lived in the fear of everyone who orbited near it. For 11 years, the species of the coral reach had agreed, without ever signing a word, that a certain band of empty space would remain empty. It ran between the amber sun of Vetch and the drowned blue giant of Ossuary Prime, a corridor of nothing 3 light days deep, and into that nothing no warship of any flag had passed without being reduced to a cloud of cooling slag. The Thren Dominion held one side. The coalition of lesser suns held the other. Between them lay the Silence Corridor, and it had earned the name the Honest Way, with the bones of the dead. Aboard the observation station Kel 9, a Thren sensor warden named Asu had watched that corridor for 6 years. She knew its moods the way a fisherman knows a strait. She knew the way its dust drifted, the way its 2 flanking suns pulsed against her instruments, the way silence there was not the absence of sound but the presence of a held breath. She had watched the coalition test the line with drones and lose them. She had watched her own dominion test it with a scout squadron and bury the crews with full honors and no bodies. She believed, with the certainty of long habit, that the corridor was a law of the universe and not a decision that anyone could revoke. Then, on the 9th hour of a shift like any other, a single new mark bloomed at the far edge of her sensor field, and her certainty began to die. It came in slow. That was the first wrong thing. Everything that entered the Silence Corridor entered fast, because speed was the only prayer worth saying there. Ships ran the line the way a soldier runs across open ground under fire, low and quick and desperate, hoping momentum would carry them past whatever waited. This mark did not run. It walked. It crossed the outer boundary at a cruising velocity so leisurely that Asu's console flagged it as a sensor error and asked her politely whether she wished to recalibrate. She did not recalibrate. She leaned closer. The second wrong thing was the size. When the mass return resolved, Asu felt the small hairs along her spine stand up beneath her uniform. The object massed more than the entire orbital defense grid of Kel 9. It massed more than the Thren battle station that anchored this sector. When the shape began to firm out of the dust and the distance, it did not look like any warship she had ever catalogued, and Asu had catalogued them all. It was long and it was heavy, and it was built without apology, a slab of dark metal that carried its weapons on the outside like a creature that had never once needed to hide. The third wrong thing, the thing that made her hand hover over the alert stud without pressing it, was that the object was broadcasting. Openly. On every frequency at once, in a repeating loop, it sang its own name into the corridor where no one had dared to make a sound in 11 years. The translation matrix rendered the loop into Thren a half-second later, and Asu read the words twice before she believed them. Flagship of the Human Confederation, StarForge-class, designation *Avantine. We are crossing. We intend no strike on either flank. Hold. Asu pressed the stud. 200,000 kilometers ahead of Kel 9 sensors, inside the object that had just terrified a 6-year veteran, a young woman stood at the edge of the forward observation gallery of the Avantine and made herself breathe. Her name was Wren Calloway, and she was 26 years old, and she was, at this exact moment, more frightened than she had ever been in her life. She was careful not to let it reach her face, because her face was visible to 11 other officers on the bridge tier below, and because she had learned early that fear in a junior officer travels upward and outward like a spilled liquid, finding every low place. So she stood with her hands folded behind her back, in the posture she had practiced in a mirror the night before her first posting, and she watched the corridor come at them through the armored gallery glass, and she did not let her hands shake. Wren was the *Avantine *S Junior Tactical Liaison, which was a grand title for a role that mostly meant she stood near the important people and translated what the censors said into what the captain needed to hear quickly, without editorializing. She had held the post for 4 months. In those 4 months, the Avantine had done nothing more dangerous than a patrol sweep along the Confederation's own quiet border, and Wren had begun to suspect she had joined a navy that would never fire a shot in her lifetime. Then the order had come to cross the silence corridor, and she had understood all at once and with a lurch in her stomach that quiet borders were not the natural state of the universe. They were something someone paid for. Liaison Calloway. The voice came from the command dais behind and above her, calm, unhurried, belonging to a woman who had been in more of these than Wren had years. Tell me what our friend on the flank thinks we are. Wren turned. Captain Isolde Mar sat in the command seat the way a mountain sits in a valley, without effort, as if the ship were simply the shape her stillness had taken. She was watching Wren, not the displays. That was a thing Wren had noticed about her in 4 months. Mar watched people, and let the machines watch the machines. The Thren station just went a full alert, Captain, Wren said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Kel 9, their sensor grid is lighting every band. They're tracking us and they're feeding it up the chain toward the ossuary anchor fortress. But they haven't locked weapons. She hesitated. They keep starting to lock and stopping. I can see the targeting solutions form and dissolve. 3 times now. 3 times, Mar repeated, and something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. They're arguing. Ma'am. Somewhere on that station, Mar said, a very frightened officer keeps telling her commander the range is good, we should fire, this is what the corridor is for. And her commander keeps looking at the mass return and asking her to check it again. Because no one crosses the line at a walk, Liaison. You cross it running, because running looks like fear, and fear is a language everyone in this corridor speaks. We are not speaking it. We are speaking something they don't have a word for, and it is making them hold their weapons. Mar leaned back a fraction. Keep watching the locks. The moment they stop forming, tell me. That will mean the argument is over, one way or the other. Wren turned back to the glass. Below her the corridor unspooled, dust and dark, and the 2 distant suns burning at the edges of everything like the coals of a fire someone had built and abandoned. She thought about the frightened officer on Kel 9, whoever she was, and felt a strange kinship across the impossible gap. 2 young women on 2 ships, both certain the older person in charge of them had lost their mind. The difference, Wren thought, was that she could see the plan and the Thren officer could not. And even seeing it, she was not sure the plan was sane. The plan had been explained to the officers of the Avantine * 40 hours earlier, in the ship's briefing amphitheater, by a Confederation strategist who had come aboard for exactly that purpose and would leave the moment it was done. Wren had sat in the 4th row and taken notes she did not need, because she already understood the shape of it, and understanding it had kept her awake for 2 nights. The Thren Dominion and the coalition of lesser suns had been at cold war across the silence corridor for 11 years. Neither could cross it. Neither could afford to let the other cross it. And so both had poured their treasure and their young people into fleets that sat on either side of an empty band of space, staring, bleeding money, going nowhere. It was a wound that would not close, and it had begun, in the last 2 years, to bleed outward. The Thren had started raiding Confederation shipping to pay for the standoff. The coalition had started doing the same. Humanity, which had until recently been a quiet newcomer at the edge of the coral reach, a trading people with a small, proud navy, and a talent for building things that lasted, had found itself squeezed from both sides by 2 exhausted giants who could not stop fighting each other long enough to notice they were making a 3rd enemy. The Confederation Assembly had debated for a year. Then it had voted, narrowly, for a single sentence of policy that the strategist read aloud from a slate as if it were a line of scripture. We will end the standoff by proving it was never real. The corridor, the strategist explained, was not held by weapons. It was held by belief. Both sides believed that crossing meant death, and so both sides had arranged the corridor so that crossing did mean death, and the arrangement had become the belief, and the belief had become the arrangement, until the whole thing spun like a wheel with nothing at its center. Every ship that had ever died in the silence corridor had died running, had died looking like a threat, had died triggering the reflex that both fleets had built into their bones. No one had ever crossed the line slowly, openly, announcing themselves, daring both sides at once to be the one who fired the first shot in a war neither of them wanted with a power neither of them understood. That was what the Avantine was going to do. It is the largest warship humanity has ever built, the strategist had said, and Wren remembered the way his voice had gone quiet on the word largest, not proud but grave. Not because we needed it to be, because we needed them to see it and understand in the first 3 seconds that we could hurt them worse than they could hurt us, and that we were choosing deliberately in front of everyone not to. A ship that big, crossing that slowly, saying that plainly, it puts a question to both fleets that they cannot answer with a reflex. It makes them think, and a corridor held together by a reflex cannot survive anyone stopping to think. A young officer 2 rows down had raised a hand and asked the question Wren had been too afraid to ask. "And if they fire anyway, sir?" The strategist had looked at him for a long moment. "Then we will have been wrong about something very important," he said, "and the Avantine will find out whether she is as strong as her builders promised. But I do not think they will fire. I think both fleets have spent 11 years teaching their crews that the corridor is death, and I think the moment a ship crosses it and does not die, that teaching will crack. And I think everyone in this sector has been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone brave enough or foolish enough to prove that the wall they've been staring at was only ever painted on the air." Wren had written nothing down. She had only sat there in the 4th row and thought, brave enough or foolish enough. And she had wondered which one they were about to be, and whether, when the moment came, anyone aboard would be able to tell the difference. Now the moment was here, and it was worse than the briefing, because the briefing had been words and this was the actual corridor, actually widening in the actual glass, with an actual station 300,000 kilometers off the port bow that had actually just tried to kill them 3 times and stopped itself 3 times, and might not stop a 4th. "Locks forming again," Wren said. Her mouth had gone dry. "Kel 9, 4 solutions, holding. She watched the little geometry of death draw itself across her console, lines converging on the Avantine *S mark, the range readout ticking down as the corridor carried the 2 of them closer. "Range is optimal for their forward batteries now, Captain. If they were going to fire on approach, this is when." "I know," said Mar, and did not change the ship's course, and did not raise the shields past their standing level, and did not do any of the dozen things that every instinct in Wren's body was screaming at her to make happen. The captain simply sat and watched Wren, and waited with a patience so total it was almost unbearable to be near. Wren understood dimly that this was also part of the message, that the Thren were watching the Avantine the way she watched her console, reading everything it did for signs of fear or aggression, and that a shield brought up too fast or a course altered too sharply would speak louder than any broadcast. The Avantine had to walk the line the way a person walks past a strange dog, slow, calm, giving no reason for the reflex to fire. The entire survival of 1,100 souls aboard depended on the ship's ability to look like it was not afraid, which meant it depended, in some small part, on Wren, on her voice staying level as she read out the locks, on her hands staying still, on the frightened officer on Kel 9 hearing, through some instrument or another, that the enormous thing walking through her corridor was not panicking, and taking that stillness as a kind of permission to keep her own weapons cold a few seconds longer. "4 locks," Wren said again, and her voice held, "holding at optimal." Holding. The range readout crossed the threshold, the point of no excuses, the range at which a Thren battery commander could no longer claim to be merely tracking. "We are inside their envelope, Captain, fully. If they fire now, it is a decision, not a reflex." The bridge of the Avantine went very quiet. 11 officers and 1 captain and 1 26-year-old liaison, all of them listening to the same silence, all of them waiting to learn whether 11 years of belief could be undone by one ship walking slowly through the dark. On Kel 9, Asu the sensor warden stared at her 4 perfect targeting solutions, and behind her, her station commander said in a voice she had never heard him use, "Do not fire, whatever you do. Do not fire until I tell you." And Asu took her hand off the stud, and both of them watched the impossible thing come on. The locks held, and then one by one they dissolved. "Locks are gone," Wren breathed. "All 4, they released us. Captain, they let us in." "No," said Mar softly, and now she did smile, a small hard thing with no comfort in it. "They didn't let us in, liaison. They just failed to stop us. Those are very different, and they will spend the next hour learning how different. Take us to the center of the corridor and hold there. Dead center. Full stop." She folded her hands. "Now the hard part begins." The Avantine came to a full stop in the exact geometric center of the silence corridor. 3 light days of forbidden nothing at its back, and 3 light days of forbidden nothing ahead. And there it hung, a mountain of dark human metal parked in the one place in the sector no one had dared to occupy for over a decade, and it waited for the galaxy to decide what to do about it. For the first 11 minutes, nothing happened at all. Wren found the nothing worse than the approach had been. During the approach there had been the locks to read, the geometry to narrate, a task to hold onto with both hands. Now there was only the waiting, and the waiting was made of the knowledge that on both flanks of the corridor, 2 vast war fleets were receiving the same sensor feed she were seeing the same impossible mark sitting motionless in the dead center of their standoff, and were, somewhere in their command chains, screaming the same question at each other. "What is it? What does it want? What do we do?" "Both sides are talking now," Wren reported. "Not to us, to each other or to their own commands. The traffic between the Thren anchor at Ossuary and their forward stations just spiked by a factor of 40, same on the coalition side. There," she searched for the word. "They're arguing, loudly, in every direction." "Good," said Mar, "let them. An argument is a fleet that isn't shooting." She rose from the command seat for the first time since the crossing began, and came down the short flight of steps to stand beside Wren at the gallery glass. And for a moment the two of them simply looked out at the corridor together, the veteran and the youth, the same dust and dark and distant coals filling both their eyes. "You did well," Mar said quietly so that only Wren could hear it. "Your voice held. That mattered more than you know. Ships have been lost in tighter spots than this because one frightened officer let a tremor into a report, and a captain believed the tremor over the data." She was still watching the corridor. "Fear is contagious across a bridge. So is calm. You carried calm across hours when it counted. Remember that you can do that. You'll need it before this is over." Wren didn't trust herself to answer, so she nodded, and hoped the nod said what she couldn't. "Now," said Mar, straightening, the private moment folded away as neatly as it had opened. "Tell me about the 2 fleets, not their numbers, their nerves. Which side is more afraid of us right now?" Wren turned to her console and pulled the 2 force dispositions into the display, the Thren on the port flank and the coalition on the starboard, 2 great arcs of warships facing each other across the corridor, with the Avantine now sitting squarely in the no man's land between them. She studied the traffic, the emission patterns, the small tells that a fleet gives off when it is frightened versus when it is merely alert. It took her a minute. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of reading she had trained 4 years to do, and never once believed she would do for real. "The Thren," she said finally, "the Thren are more afraid. Their forward stations are powering weapons up and down in cycles. They can't decide whether to hold at readiness or stand down, so they keep doing both. That's panic. The coalition is steadier. Their emissions are flatter. They're frightened too, but they're frightened the way a professional is frightened. Controlled." She frowned at the display. "The Thren are the ones who will break first." If anyone fires, it'll be them, out of nerves, not orders. Which is precisely why we stopped on the Thren side of True Center, said Mar, and Wren looked at the display again and realized it was true. The Avantine was parked a hair closer to the Thren flank than the Coalition one, close enough that the Thren had to see the ship as facing them, close enough to force the frightened side to be the side that made the first decision. You put your weight in front of the nervous one, Mar said. Not to threaten it, to give it no room to pretend you aren't its problem. A frightened fleet that thinks it can ignore you will convince itself you're the other side's affair. A frightened fleet with you sitting on its doorstep has to act. And a fleet that has to act but has been forbidden to shoot has only one thing left it can do. Talk, Wren said. Talk, Mar agreed. Watch your comms, it's coming. It came 4 minutes later. The hail arrived on a tight directional beam, Thren origin, from the anchor fortress at Ossuary Prime, and not from any of the forward stations, which told Wren that the argument on the Thren side had climbed all the way to the top and been settled there. The translation matrix rendered it clean. The voice, when the bridge speakers carried it, was old and dry and very controlled, and Wren pictured a commander who had spent 11 years staring across this corridor and had never once expected the corridor to speak back. Human vessel. This is Warlord Sethric Vaughn, commanding the Thren Dominion forces of the Ossuary anchorage. You have entered a zone of war under armistice. Your presence here is a violation of 11 years of established custom and a provocation to 2 fleets. State your intentions or be treated as hostile. You have been observed. You will not be observed indefinitely. Mar returned to the command dais before she answered. Wren understood why. The reply would be recorded and studied and replayed on 100 bridges across the sector, and the captain of the Avantine would be seen giving it from the command seat of her ship, not standing at a window like a passenger. Every gesture was a sentence in a language the whole corridor was reading. Warlord Vaughn, said Mar, and her voice went out on the same open broadcast the Avantine had used to announce itself, so that both fleets heard the answer at once. This is Captain Isolde Mar of the Confederation Flagship Avantine *. I will tell you my intentions plainly, because plainness is why I am here. I intend to sit in the center of this corridor and do nothing. I intend to fire on no one. I intend to prove that a ship can cross this line and live, and I intend for both your fleet and the coalitions to watch me prove it. That is all. That is everything. A pause. The beam carried the warlord's silence back across 300,000 kilometers of dust. You have not answered why, said Vaughn at last. Because your war is bleeding onto my people, said Mar. For 2 years your raiders and the coalition's raiders have both taken Confederation ships to pay for a standoff that neither of you can win and neither of you can end. You have made us the purse you both reach into. I have come to close the purse. I cannot end your war. I would not presume to try. But I can end the thing your war has become, which is a corridor of fear so total that no one has tested it in 11 years, and fear that goes untested long enough stops being caution and starts being a cage. I have come to open the cage. You are welcome to watch. You are welcome to fire if you believe that firing on a ship that has fired on no one is a thing your Dominion wishes to be known for in front of the Coalition, in front of the whole Reach. But I do not think you do. I think you are as tired of this corridor as I am. I think you have simply forgotten that it was ever allowed to change. The broadcast ended and the bridge held its breath, and Wren watched the 2 force dispositions on her console, watching the emission patterns, watching for the flare that would mean a battery had been ordered to fire. It did not come. Instead, something stranger happened. On the starboard flank, the Coalition fleet, which had been holding its steady professional readiness, began, very slowly, to shift, not toward the Avantine *, not toward the Thren. It began to reorient so that its sensor arrays and its long-range arrays faced not the human ship in the center but the Thren fleet across the way, and Wren understood, with a small cold thrill, Exactly what she was seeing. "Captain," she said, "the coalition just repositioned. They're not covering us anymore. They're covering the Thren. Captain, I think they've decided that if the Thren fire on us, the coalition doesn't want to be standing next to it. They just told the whole corridor whose side they'd be on if this goes wrong. And it isn't the Threns." Mar's smile returned, that same hard small thing. "And there it is," she said softly. "The first crack. 11 years of belief, and we've been here 20 minutes, and one of the two fleets has just publicly refused to back the other one's reflex. Warlord Von saw that same repositioning we did. He now knows that if he fires on us out of nerves, he does it alone, with the coalition watching and choosing not to stand with him. We just made his fear cost more than his patience." She let out a slow breath. "The purse is closing, Liaison, slowly, but it's closing." Wren stared at the two arcs of ships and felt, for the first time since the crossing began, something other than fear. It was a small thing and it did not last long, but it was real. The sense that the impossible plan she had thought was madness might, after all, be working. That belief really could be a wall painted on the air, and that all it took to prove it was one ship willing to walk up and put its hand through the paint. Then her console chimed, low and urgent, a tone she had learned in training and hoped never to hear in the field, and the small good feeling died. "Captain," she said, and now her voice did want to shake and she made it not. "New contacts, behind us, emerging from the Thren side of the corridor, running dark until now, coming up fast on our stern. 6 of them, Thren signatures, heavy, and they are not slowing down." The 6 ships had been there the whole time. Wren realized it as the tactical picture resolved, and felt sick with the realization. While the warlord had been talking, while the corridor had been holding its breath, a Thren strike wing had been threading up the corridor behind the Avantine under full emission discipline, drives cold, running on the dust and the dark the way a predator runs a hedgerow. They had been positioning. They had used the whole conversation, the whole grand demonstration of human nerve, as cover. And now they were behind the human flagship at a range where the Avantine *S stern arcs were weakest, and they were accelerating, and their weapons were coming live. "That treacherous," one of the bridge officers began, and Mar cut him off with a single raised hand, not even looking at him. "No," she said, "not treachery, insurance. The warlord talked to us honestly with his front and prepared to kill us with his back, because he is an old and careful commander who has survived 11 years on this line by never trusting a thing that hasn't died yet. He would have preferred we leave. He said as much. But he was never going to bet his dominion on our good intentions, so he put a knife behind us in case the conversation went the wrong way." She was already studying the tactical picture, her stillness total, her voice unhurried even now. "Liaison, read me those 6 ships, everything." Wren read. Her training took over and her fear went somewhere she could deal with later. 6 Thren strike cruisers, Wolf-class configuration, built for exactly this: fast, low emissions, heavy forward torpedoes, thin armor. They're a surprise weapon. They are not built to trade blows with a capital ship. They're built to put 100 torpedoes into a target that never saw them coming and then run before it can turn. They've committed. At this acceleration they cannot break off cleanly. In 90 seconds they'll be in torpedo range of our stern. She swallowed. "Our stern arcs are our weakest facing, Captain. They knew that. This is a good attack. This is a very good attack." "Yes," Mar agreed, as if complimenting a student. "It is, so we are not going to let it be a stern attack." She keyed the ship wide. Her voice went out to 1,100 souls, calm as still water. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to be tested. 6 Thren cruisers are attempting a stern strike. We will not be struck in the stern. Helm, on my mark, we are going to turn this ship to face them, and we are going to do it faster than a ship this size has any right to. Weapons, forward batteries free the instant we bear. Everyone else, hold your stations and trust the person next to you. Mark in 10. Wren stared at the command dais. Turning the asterisk Avantine to face the attackers meant showing the Wren front flank fleet the ship's broadside for the duration of the turn, an invitation to every battery on that side. It meant trusting that the front would hold its fire while the Avantine dealt with the knife at its back. It meant betting 1,100 lives on the belief that Warlord Vaughn's honest front and treacherous back were two different decisions, and that only one of them had been committed to. "Captain," Wren said low, "if the front fleet fires while we're broadside to them—" "Then Vaughn will have committed both decisions at once," said Mar, "and we'll know he never meant a word of it, and it won't matter what we do because we'll be dead either way. But I don't think he did. I think the strike wing was his hedge and the conversation was his true intent, and I think the part of him that talked to us honestly is going to be horrified when he realizes his own knife is about to force our hand in front of the whole corridor." She almost smiled. "We are about to make his own insurance policy embarrass him, liaison. Watch the front fleet. If even one battery on that side goes live during our turn, tell me instantly. It will mean I read the man wrong." "Mark in 5, the helm officer said. Wren split her attention in two, half on the 6 cruisers closing on the stern, half on the great arc of the Wren front fleet off the port flank, her finger hovering over the alert she prayed she would not have to press. The corridor, which had held its breath for 11 years and then for 20 impossible minutes, drew that breath deeper still. "Mark," said Captain Mar. And the Avantine began to turn. While the corridor held its breath, Wren found a moment, no more than a handful of seconds, stolen between sensor sweeps, to think about how she had come to be standing here at all. She had grown up on a Confederation shipbuilding world, one of the quiet industrial planets that made humanity's reputation in the coral reach. Her mother had welded hull plate. Her father had run diagnostics on drive cores. Wren had grown up in the shadow of half-built ships, had walked to school past slipways where hulls the size of cathedrals took shape over years, and she had learned young that humans were not, by the standards of the older species, especially numerous or especially fast or especially clever. What humans were was patient. What humans did was build things that outlasted the reasons they were built. A Wren ship was a beautiful thing, and it lasted 20 years. A coalition ship was elegant, and it lasted 30. A human ship was ugly and overbuilt and unlovely, and it lasted a century, because the people who made it had grown up watching their parents make things that had to last, on worlds where nothing came easy and nothing came twice. The Avantine was the truest expression of that patience anyone had ever forged. It had taken 9 years to build. Wren had been a teenager when its keel was laid and a graduate when it launched, and she had understood, watching the enormous dark shape ease out of its slipway for the first time, that her people had not built it to win a battle. They had built it to end an argument. A ship that large, that overbuilt, that plainly capable of destruction, made a certain kind of conversation impossible to have. You could not threaten it. You could not bully the people who had made it. You could only in the end deal with them because the alternative was too expensive to contemplate. That was the whole human theory of strength, distilled into a single dark hull. Build the thing no one wants to fight so that no one has to. And now she was standing inside that theory, in the center of the silence corridor, watching it be tested against 11 years of someone else's fear. She thought about her mother's hands, scarred from the welding arc, and about the thousands of hands like them that had shaped this hull, and she understood that she was not really the Avantine *S courage. The courage had been poured into the ship by everyone who had ever built it, all of them betting, without ever meeting the Wren or the coalition, that patience and plainness and an unlovely mountain of good metal could do what 11 years of guns had not. She was only the one who happened to be standing here when the bet came due. "Liaison," Mar's voice pulled her back. "You went somewhere." "Home, Captain," Wren admitted. "For a moment. My parents built ships, not this one smaller yards, but ships." She hesitated. "I was thinking that we didn't bring the Avantine here. Everyone who ever made a human ship brought it here. We're just the ones holding the wheel." Mar looked at her for a long moment, and something in the veteran's face softened by a fraction that Wren would not have caught 4 months ago. "That is exactly right," Mar said quietly. "And it is a thing most officers don't learn until they're much older than you, if they learn it at all. A ship is not brave. A ship cannot be brave. It's metal. The bravery is in the people who built it believing it would be used well, and in the people who crew it proving them right. When this is over, liaison, and someone tells you the Avantine was fearless today, correct them. Tell them the ship was made fearless by hands that never saw this corridor, and that the least we could do was be worthy of it." She turned back to the corridor. "Now, back to your instruments. We are still, technically, in the most dangerous place in the sector, and I would prefer not to die while we're being philosophical." Wren almost smiled and turned back to her console, and found the fear had loosened its grip by exactly the amount of one remembered welding arc, one pair of scarred hands, one industrial world that had taught its children that the strongest thing you could build was a thing patient enough not to need to be used. A ship the size of the Avantine does not turn the way a fighter turns. It turns the way a continent would turn, if a continent could, which is to say it turns by main force and enormous violence, its whole vast mass wrenched around a point by engines built to move a mountain and asked now to move it fast. Wren felt it in her body before she saw it on the display. The compensators fought the maneuver and lost a little, and the deck seemed to lean under her feet in a way decks were never meant to lean, and somewhere deep in the ship, a sound came up through the structure that she had never heard before. A low structural groan like the ship itself was clenching its teeth. The stars in the gallery glass swung. The 2 distant suns wheeled across the black. And the 6 Wren cruisers, which had committed to a stern attack and could not now uncommit, found the geometry they had planned their whole ambush around dissolving in front of them as the target they had crept up behind turned, impossibly, to look them in the eye. "They're breaking their attack run," Wren said, watching the 6 marks scatter. "They didn't expect the turn. They can't put torpedoes into our stern anymore because we don't have a stern facing them. Captain, they're having to re-aim, they're having to reacquire. We bought seconds. We bought so many seconds." "Forward batteries," said Mar. "Do we bear?" "Bearing," the weapons officer called. "Bearing, we bear." "Fire." The Avantine had crossed the silence corridor without firing a shot, had sat in its center without firing a shot, had absorbed a hail and an argument and a betrayal without firing a shot. Now it fired, and the corridor learned what the silence had been holding back. Wren had read the Avantine *S specifications during her 4 months aboard. She had known, as a number on a slate, what the forward batteries could do. Knowing it as a number and seeing it as a thing that happened to 6 real ships in front of her were not the same, and she would carry the difference for the rest of her life. The forward batteries of a StarForge-class flagship were not built to trade blows with strike cruisers. They were built to end capital ships, to reach across the vacuum and unmake something the size of a battle station. And they were being brought to bear, now, at close range, on 6 thin-skinned raiders that had gambled everything on never being seen coming and had, instead, been seen coming and turned toward. The first cruiser simply ceased to be. There was no drawn-out death, no venting hull, no drifting wreck. There was a ship, and then there was an expanding sphere of light where the ship had been, and the light was gone almost before Wren registered it, and her console updated the count from 6 to 5 without ceremony. The second cruiser tried to break away and took a glancing strike that opened it from bow to midships, and it tumbled out of the fight trailing atmosphere and bodies and the ruin of its drive, still intact enough to be called a ship, no longer intact enough to be called a threat. The remaining 4 scattered. They had come as wolves, and they had found, not the wounded thing they'd stalked, but a thing that turned and looked at them with the full face of its power, and whatever discipline had held them through the silent approach broke all at once. 3 of them ran. One of them, either braver or more frightened than the rest, held its course, and emptied its torpedo tubes at the Avantine *S bow at point-blank range. A full spread. 100 weapons launched in a single defiant salvo that was the only thing the cruiser had ever been built to do. Torpedoes inbound, Wren said. Full spread from the near cruiser, 100 plus. Impact in. Let them come, said Mar. Wren's head snapped toward the dais. But the point defense grid was already awake, and she understood, watching it, that this too was part of the message. The Avantine did not evade. It did not throw itself sideways or spin up its screens to their screaming maximum, or do any of the frantic things a smaller ship would do to survive 100 torpedoes. It simply stood and let its point defense grid do the work it was built for, and the work was total. The 100 torpedoes came in and the grid met them, and space in front of the Avantine *S bow lit up with 100 small silent flowers of destruction, one after another, a wall of interception so dense and so casual that not one torpedo in the spread reached the hull. The Avantine did not so much as shift its position. It took the best single blow the Wren strike wing could throw, at point-blank range, and it did not move, and the whole corridor watched it not move. All torpedoes intercepted, Wren said, and her voice came out strange because she was watching a thing that should have been impossible and had just been made to look easy. 0 hits. 0, Captain. We didn't even maneuver. No, said Mar, we didn't, and that is the part they'll remember longest. She watched the last defiant cruiser, its tubes empty, its spread spent and wasted, hanging naked in front of the flagship it had failed to touch. Weapons, that last one, disable, do not destroy. Take its drive and its weapons and leave the crew alive. I want it to go home. I wanted to tell them what it saw, a beat. And cease fire on the 3 that are running. Let them run. Dead raiders are a grievance. Living witnesses are an argument. The weapons officer acknowledged. A single precise strike took the last cruiser's drive nacelle and left the rest of it drifting and powerless and full of living, terrified Wren who had just watched their whole strike wing broken by a ship that had turned to face them, and then declined to move. The 3 runners fled up the corridor toward the Wren flank and were allowed to flee. And the Avantine completed the last of its great slow turn and came to rest again, facing the Wren front fleet now instead of holding its center, its bow toward the anchor fortress at Ossuary Prime, its weapons cooling, its hull unmarked. The entire engagement had lasted less than 90 seconds. The silence that followed it was the loudest thing Wren had ever not heard. On Kel 9, Asu the sensor warden had watched the whole thing on her grid, every second of it, and when it was over she found that she had stopped breathing at some point and had to remind her body to start again. She had seen strike wings deployed before. She had seen the Wolf cruisers do their work, and it was terrible work, and she had believed, the way everyone in the Dominion believed, that 6 of them coming out of the dark was a death sentence for anything short of a coalition dreadnought. She had watched the 6 of them creep up the corridor behind the human ship, and she had thought, with a sick certainty, that the demonstration was over, that the strangers had walked into the oldest trap in the corridor, that the warlord's patience had only ever been the patience of a hunter letting the prey settle. And then the human ship had turned. It should not have been able to turn like that. Nothing that size turned like that. She had watched the mass return wrench itself around in a maneuver her instruments flagged as structurally impossible for the displacement involved, and she had watched the 6 wolves scatter like children, and she had watched 4 of them die or break in 90 seconds against a thing that then stood, unmoving, and let 100 torpedoes shatter themselves against its point defense without so much as flinching aside. That was the part that undid her, not the turn, not the guns, the not flinching. Every ship Asu had ever tracked in 11 years of watching this corridor had flinched. Flinching was what ships did. It was the deepest instinct of anything alive in the dark, and the human flagship had been given every reason to flinch and had simply chosen not to, had stood in the open and taken the blow and let the whole corridor see that it could, and Asu understood, watching it, that she had been wrong about something very large. She had thought the corridor was held by weapons. She had spent 6 years believing the silence was made of the guns on either side. And she had just watched a single ship walk into the middle of it, break the Dominion's best trap without effort, spare the survivors on purpose, and prove that the guns had never been the thing holding the line at all. The thing holding the line had been fear. And the humans had brought a ship built, from the keel up, to be the one thing in the corridor with nothing left to be afraid of. Behind her, her station commander had not said a word in 2 full minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Log it all," he said. "Every second. Send it to Ossuary on the priority channel and mark it for the warlord's own eyes." A pause. "And note in the log that the human vessel spared the survivors. Note it plainly. He will want to know that they could have killed everyone and chose not to. That will matter more to him than the ones they killed." Asu logged it. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they had been at the start of the shift, and she did not fully understand why until later, when the shift was over and she was lying awake in her bunk staring at the ceiling of a station that had watched the impossible happen. It was because the corridor had changed, and some part of her had been waiting 6 years for it to change. And now that it had, the held breath she had been holding for 6 years could finally go out. Aboard the Avantine, Warlord Sethric Vaughn's second hail arrived 8 minutes after the last cruiser died, and this time it did not come on the open broadcast. It came on a tight beam, private, captain to commander, and the translation matrix rendered a voice that had aged a decade in 8 minutes. "Captain Mar," a long pause, "the strike wing was mine. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise, and I will not insult us both by pretending it was authorized by anyone above me because it was not. It was my caution. 11 years on this line teaches a commander to keep a knife behind his back even while he speaks honestly with his front. I kept mine. You saw it. You broke it. And then, another pause longer. And then you spared what was left of it. You disabled the last cruiser instead of ending it. You let 3 run. My instruments tell me you have a survivor drifting out there full of my people, alive, when you could have made all of them dead and been within every right of war to do it. I am trying to understand why." Mar answered from the command seat on the same private beam. "Because I did not come here to kill your people, Warlord. I came here to prove the corridor was a lie. Your strike wing gave me the chance to prove it in a way words never could, and I took it, and now I have no further use for their deaths. Dead men close doors. I am trying to open one." "You could have died," said Vaughn. "If I had ordered my front fleet to fire while you turned, you showed them your broadside for 11 seconds. I counted. 11 seconds, Captain, at that range with 200 batteries bearing. You gambled your whole ship on my not giving one order." "Yes," said Mar, "I did." "Why?" "Because I had spoken with you," she said simply. And a man who sends a knife behind his back while he speaks honestly with his front is a man who has not decided to kill you. He has only decided not to be caught unready if you force him to. I gambled that you had not decided. I gambled on the honest part of you being the true part. A pause. "Was I wrong, Warlord?" The beam was silent for a long time. "No," said Sethric Vaughn at last, and something in the old dry voice had cracked open, something that 11 years of standoff had welded shut. "No, you were not wrong. I gave no order. I watched my own strike wing break against you, and I did not give the order to fire, and do you know why, Captain? Because the coalition had already turned to cover me. Because if I had fired on you, I would have done it alone, with the whole Reach watching on a ship that had fired on no one and then spared my own men. And I found in that moment that I could not do it. That after 11 years of this corridor, I had finally found the one thing I would not do to hold it, a breath. You did not break my strike wing, Captain Mar. You broke something older than that. You broke the reason the corridor existed. And I am not yet certain whether to thank you or to grieve." "You may do both," said Mar gently. "Most true things deserve both." She let a moment pass. "Warlord, I did not cross this line to defeat you. I crossed it to give you a way out of a war you cannot win and cannot end. The coalition is watching us speak, though they cannot hear the words. When I am done here, I intend to cross the rest of the corridor and say the same things to them that I have said to you. And then I intend to leave, and let the two of you decide what to do with a corridor that no longer has a wall down its middle. That is all I want. That is the whole of it. And Wren, standing at the gallery glass, listening to a warlord's voice break open on a private beam, understood that the battle had never been the 6 cruisers. The 6 cruisers had been a test the Avantine had passed. The real battle had been for the thing inside the old commander's chest, the 11-year certainty that the corridor was a law of the universe, and that battle had just been won, not with the guns, but with what the ship had chosen not to do with them. She turned to look at Captain Mar, and found the captain already looking at her. "You understand," Mar said quietly, off the beam so only Wren could hear. "The guns were never the point. The guns were only there so that our mercy would mean something. A ship that cannot kill has no mercy to give. We built the most terrifying thing humanity could build so that when we chose not to use it, everyone watching would know exactly what we were choosing not to do." She looked back out at the corridor. "Half our work is done. There's another fleet across this dark that still believes in the wall. Take us across, liaison, slow, the same way we came in. Let's go show the coalition what the Wren just learned." The Avantine got underway again, and Wren discovered that the second crossing was harder than the first, though nothing about it should have been. The first crossing had been into the unknown. This one was into a fleet that had watched the Avantine break a Wren strike wing in 90 seconds, and then decline to finish it. A fleet that now knew exactly what the human flagship could do and had seen with its own sensors that it did not do all it could. That knowledge should have made the second crossing safer. Instead, it made it stranger, because the coalition of lesser suns had spent the last hour recalculating everything it believed about the corridor, and a fleet in the middle of recalculating is an unpredictable thing. "Coalition dispositions changing," Wren reported, as the Avantine moved slowly across the corridor's center line toward the starboard flank and the arc of coalition ships waiting there. "There, Captain, they don't know what posture to hold. Some elements are standing down, some are coming to full readiness. There's no coordination. It's like watching a body argue with itself." She studied the traffic. "They've seen everything the Wren saw. They know we spared the strike wing. But the Wren are their enemy, and we just came from the Wren side, and I don't think they know whether that makes us a friend or a new kind of threat." "It makes us neither," said Mar, "and that is the hardest thing in the galaxy for a fleet at war to understand. Everyone in a war believes there are 2 kinds of ship, theirs and the enemy's. We are a third kind, and there is no slot in their doctrine to put us in, and a body with no slot for a thing does the only thing it knows how to do. It gets frightened." She watched the starboard arc grow in the display. "Keep reading them. The coalition worries me more than the Wren did." "Why, Captain?" "Because the Wren were afraid," Mar said, "and I understand afraid. The coalition is proud. They held their nerve through the whole demonstration. They repositioned to cover the Wren like professionals. They did not panic once. And proud fleets that do not panic are the ones that make cold decisions. And a cold decision can be far worse than a frightened one, because a frightened commander shoots by reflex and stops when the reflex passes, but a proud commander shoots on purpose and does not stop." She was very still. The Wren feared the corridor. The coalition believed in it. And belief is harder to break than fear, liaison, because fear only wants to survive and belief wants to be right. The coalition hail came before the Avantine had crossed the halfway mark, and it came, unlike the Wren's, on the open broadcast, deliberately public, meant for every ship in the corridor to hear. "Human vessel Avantine *." The voice was clear and young and certain, and Wren was startled by how young it sounded, younger than Mar, perhaps not much older than herself. "This is Fleet Speaker Wren Call of the Coalition of Lesser Suns. We have observed your crossing. We have observed your engagement with the Wren strike wing. We have observed your restraint, and we are not fools, and we know a display when we see one. So I will speak to you as one who is not impressed by displays. You have proven you can destroy Wren cruisers. Very well. The Coalition can destroy Wren cruisers also. We have been doing it for 11 years. You have proven you can cross the corridor. Very well. You had a ship large enough to survive the crossing, which is a thing of your shipyards and not of your courage. What you have not proven, human, is why the Coalition should regard your arrival as anything but the entry of a third power into a war that was, until today, a private matter between two. You have made yourself our concern. State why we should not treat you as one. Wren watched Mar absorb the challenge, and watched her not answer immediately, and understood that the pause itself was the first move. The Wren had been met with reassurance because the Wren were afraid. The Coalition was proud, and pride could not be reassured. It could only be answered. Fleet Speaker Call, said Mar, you are right. I am not impressed with myself either, so we begin as equals. A flicker of something crossed the young Coalition voice's silence at that. Wren caught it in the emission patterns, a small hesitation. You say I have proven only that I have large shipyards and a ship that can cross a corridor. That is true, but you have misread what the display was for. It was never meant to impress you. It was meant to show you a choice you have refused to see for 11 years, and I will name it now, plainly, in front of both fleets, because plainness is the only weapon I brought that matters. You have been at war with the Wren for 11 years across a corridor neither of you can cross. In 11 years you have not won. In 11 years you have not lost. In 11 years you have taken the ships of my people to pay for a stalemate that has bought you nothing but the pride of not having yet been beaten. I am here to tell you that the corridor you have both bled for was never a wall. It was a belief. I walked through it in an hour. And now that I have walked through it, Fleet Speaker, you have a choice that you did not have this morning. You can keep believing in a wall that a stranger just proved does not exist, or you can admit that the war ended the moment the wall did, and simply has not noticed yet. You presume, said Wren Call, and now there was heat in the young voice, to tell the Coalition its war is over. I presume, said Mar, to tell you it was over years ago. You have simply been too proud to be the first to say so, and so has the Wren, and so the two of you have stood across this dark daring each other to admit the truth first, because the one who admits it first feels like the one who lost. I am offering you a way out of that. Let the stranger be the one who says it. Let me be the coward's excuse. Blame me. Tell your people the humans forced the corridor open and left you no choice but to reckon with a changed sector. I do not care what story you tell. I care that the killing stops because some of the dead in that killing are mine. A pause. You are young, Fleet Speaker. I hear it in your voice. You have perhaps commanded on this line for a few years, not 11. So let me ask you a young commander's question, one to another across the dark. When you took this post, did you believe you would hold this corridor until you died of age and hand it to someone younger still and have them do the same? Is that the war you meant to fight? Or did some part of you, when you were newer even than you are now, believe that a war was a thing that was supposed to end? The broadcast was open. The whole corridor heard the question, and the whole corridor heard the silence that answered it, and the silence stretched, and Wren realized she had stopped breathing again. Fleet Speaker Wren Call was, in fact, 31 years old, and she had commanded the Coalition's forward corridor fleet for 3 years. And she had never once, in those 3 years, said aloud the thing that Captain Mar had just said aloud to the entire sector. She had thought it. She had thought it on the long shift staring across the dark at the Wren arc that never moved and never left, the enemy she had faced for 3 years and never met, the war she had inherited fully grown and been told to feed. She had thought, more than once, in the private black of her own quarters, that she did not know how this ended, that no one seemed to know how it ended, that she was pouring her 30s into a standoff whose entire purpose was to remain a standoff. She had thought it and she had never said it, because to say it was to be the one who wavered, and a fleet speaker who wavered was a fleet speaker who would be replaced by one who did not. And now a human captain had said it for her, on the open channel, in front of her whole fleet and the enemies, and had offered her the one gift she had not known she wanted, someone else to blame for the truth. Wren stood on the command deck of her flagship and looked at the tactical display, at the enormous dark human ship walking slowly across the corridor toward her, at the drifting disabled Wren cruiser it had spared, at the Wren arc that had gone strangely quiet in the last hour. And she understood that Warlord Vaughn, her enemy of 3 years, was at this very moment sitting on his own command deck facing the same impossible choice, and that neither of them could make it while the other watched, unless someone gave them both a way to make it at the same time. Fleet Speaker, her tactical officer at her elbow low, the fleet is asking for a posture. We can't hold indecision much longer. If you don't give an order, the batteries will hold on their last order, which was full readiness, and if the human ship comes much closer at full readiness, someone's finger is going to slip. A pause. Ma'am, what do we do? Wren Calloway looked at the human ship. She thought about 11 years and 3 years, and the shape of a war with no end designed into it. She thought about the question the human had asked her, one young commander to another. Did you believe a war was a thing that was supposed to end? Order the fleet to weapons cold, she said. Her tactical officer went very still. Ma'am, weapons cold, in the corridor, with a Wren fleet across the line and an unknown capital ship approaching. Weapons cold, Wren repeated. All batteries, publicly, on the open display where both the Wren and the humans can see us do it. She kept her eyes on the approaching ship. The human said the corridor was a belief. Let's find out if she's right. Let's be the first ones to stop believing in it and see whether the sky falls. A breath. And open a channel to the Wren anchorage, to the warlord himself. It's time the two of us spoke without a wall between us, and I would rather it be my idea than the humans. The order went out, and across the corridor on every sensor grid on both flanks, the watching fleet saw the coalition arc do a thing it had not done in 11 years. They saw it stand down its weapons, deliberately, openly, in the middle of the silence corridor, in full view of the enemy. Batteries that had held live for over a decade went cold. Targeting arrays that had never once released the Wren arc released it. The proud fleet that did not panic made a cold decision, exactly as Mar had feared it might, except the cold decision was not to fire. It was to stop. Captain, Wren's voice cracked on the word and she did not care. The coalition just went weapons cold. All of it, every battery. They stood down, openly, in front of the Wren. She was staring at her console as if it might be lying to her, and they just opened a channel to the Wren anchorage. Fleet Speaker Call is hailing Warlord Vaughn, directly. First contact between the two fleet commanders in Captain. I don't think these two have ever spoken to each other. Not once. Not in 11 years. For a long moment Captain Mar said nothing at all. She sat in the command seat of the largest warship humanity had ever built, at the center of a corridor that had killed everything that entered it for 11 years, and she watched two fleets that had never spoken begin, because of what her ship had done, to speak. No, she said at last, very quietly. I don't imagine they have. She let out a breath that seemed to carry some weight out of her with it. Do you know, Liaison, what the hardest part of this was? It was not the crossing. It was not the strike wing. It was believing all the way down that they wanted this as badly as we did. That underneath 11 years of guns there were two exhausted peoples who had forgotten it was allowed to stop, and who only needed someone to walk into the middle of their war and prove that the wall was paint. She almost smiled. It is a terrible thing to gamble 1,100 lives on a hope about strangers, and it is a wonderful thing to be right. Are we right? Wren asked. Is it over? Not yet, said Mar. They're talking. Talking is not peace. Talking is only the thing that has to happen before peace, the thing that could not happen while the wall stood. There will be years of it. There will be terms and grievances and old dead to account for, and some of it will go badly, and none of it is ours to do. But she gestured at the display at the two arcs of ships, the frightened one and the proud one, both of them now with cold weapons, both of them with open channels, both of them turned, for the first time in over a decade, not toward each other's throats but toward each other's voices. But the wall is down, and a war can survive many things, liaison. It cannot survive the wall coming down and both sides deciding they'd rather talk than build it back up. That is the thing we came to do, and it is done, and it was done the moment the Second Fleet stopped believing. She rose from the command seat. Bring us to a stop, dead center of the corridor one last time, and then hold. I want to be here when they finish. I want the Avantine to be the thing they both look at when they realize the corridor is empty and no one is dying in it and the sky, after all, did not fall. The Avantine came to rest in the center of the silence corridor for the second time, and this time no one tried to kill it, and no fleet powered up its weapons, and the two great arcs of ships on either flank hung in the dark with their guns cold, and their commanders speaking across a line that had, an hour ago, been the most murderous stretch of space in the sector. Wren stood at the gallery glass and looked out at it, and felt the fear that had lived in her chest since the crossing began finally, slowly, begin to loosen its grip. And then, from the Thren flank, a new signal appeared on her console, and her breath caught for an entirely different reason. Before the Coalition answered, there was a moment on the Avantine *S bridge that Wren would remember longer than any other, because it was the moment she understood how thin the margin truly was. Her console flagged it first, a single Coalition battery on the far wing of their arc coming to a firing solution, not the whole fleet, one battery. One crew, somewhere on one ship, that had not received or had not accepted the recalculation the rest of the fleet was making. One commander who still believed in the wall and had decided, coldly, that the human ship's approach had gone far enough. "Captain," Wren said, and her voice was flat with the effort of keeping it level. "Single Coalition battery far wing coming to lock, just one. It's not the fleet, it's one ship acting alone. Solution forming. 10 seconds. If it fires, Captain, I don't know what the rest of them do. A fleet that just went weapons cold, one of its own opening fire. I can't predict that. No one could." Mar did not move. "Do not raise our shields," she said. "Do not alter course. Do not give the rest of that fleet one single reason to think we flinched." Her voice was iron. "One frightened battery is not a fleet. If we react to it, we make it a fleet. If we ignore it, we make it one frightened commander who has to explain in front of everyone why he fired on a ship that did not so much as glance at him. Hold everything. Hold it exactly." Wren held. It was the hardest thing she had done all day, harder than the crossing, harder than the strike wing, to watch a targeting solution crawl toward completion against her own ship and do nothing, change nothing, let the Avantine keep walking forward as if the battery did not exist. 8 seconds. 6. She could see the geometry of it, the lock hardening, and she thought about 1,100 souls and one frightened stranger's finger, and the terrible arithmetic of a single decision. And then, at 4 seconds, the solution wavered, and at 3, it began to dissolve, and at 2, it was gone, and a new signal bloomed from the Coalition flagship on the far side of the arc. A fleet-wide command override, Wren realized. Fleet speaker call reaching across her own formation to seize that one battery's controls and pull it cold by force. They overrode it, Wren breathed. The flagship overrode their own battery. Call took it out of the commander's hands. "Captain, she just stopped one of her own ships from firing on us in front of her whole fleet because we didn't react. Because we gave her the room to be the one who stopped it." "Yes," said Mar and let out a slow breath. "And now that battery's commander is the most isolated man in the Coalition. He raised his weapon at a ship that ignored him, and his own fleet speaker slapped it down in front of everyone. He will not raise it again. No one who watched that will raise it again. That is the difference, liaison, between a fleet held together by fear and a fleet held together by discipline. A frightened fleet, one battery fires and the rest follow because fear is contagious. A disciplined fleet, one battery fires and the commander stops it because discipline flows down from the top and not up from the nerves. The coalition is disciplined. That's why they worried me. And it's why, in the end, they were the ones who could choose peace, because their commander could make the choice stick. She almost smiled. We just watched Wren Calloway discover that she could hold her whole fleet's finger off the trigger by will alone. She didn't know she could do that until she had to. Now she knows. And a commander who knows she can hold peace by will is a very dangerous thing to a war. Wren stared at the display, at the single chastened battery going cold, at the fleet that had not followed it into violence. She thought about how close it had come, 4 seconds, one stranger's nerve, and about how the whole enormous thing, the crossing and the demonstration and the peace of 2 peoples, had balanced for 4 seconds on the edge of one frightened man's decision and one young commander's will to override him. And she understood that this was what Mar had meant 40 hours ago in the briefing, when she had said the corridor was held by belief. Belief was not an abstraction. Belief was a battery commander's finger and a fleet speaker's override, and 1,100 souls holding still, and the whole of it hanging on whether the largest thing in the sector could keep walking forward without flinching for 4 more seconds. It had, and because it had, the peace lived. Captain, Wren's voice was very careful now. Movement on the Thren flank, a single ship breaking formation, large, not a cruiser, bigger. It's leaving the Thren arc and moving into the corridor. She refined the read as the mark sharpened. It's the Anchor Fortress's own command vessel, Warlord Vaughn's flagship. It's coming into the corridor, Captain, toward the center, toward us. Weapons, said Mar. Cold, Wren said, and heard the wonder in her own voice. Weapons cold, all of them. It's coming in with cold guns and open channels. It's, Captain, it's doing what we did. It's crossing the line, slowly, openly. The same way we came in. Mar came down from the dais and stood beside Wren at the glass, and together they watched the Thren command vessel move out of its arc and into the forbidden center of the corridor. A thing no Thren ship had done in 11 years, doing it now with its weapons cold and its intentions plain, because a stranger had shown it that the crossing could be survived, and the survival could mean something. And then, on the starboard flank, a second mark broke formation, and Wren did not even need to check the signature to know what it was. The coalition flagship, she said. Fleet speaker call, she's coming in too, both of them. They're both crossing toward the center, toward each other. Her throat had gone tight. Captain, they're going to meet, here, in the middle. In the place that killed everything that entered it for 11 years, the 2 commanders who have never spoken face to face are going to meet, and we're the reason they can. We made the middle safe. We proved you could stand here and live, and now they're both coming to stand here, because we showed them it was allowed. Yes, said Mar softly, we did. The 2 flagships, Thren and Coalition, moved into the center of the silence corridor from opposite flanks, and the human ship that had opened the corridor held its position between them. And for a moment the 3 vessels hung in a rough triangle in the dead heart of the most feared stretch of space in the sector, with cold weapons and open channels and 11 years of silence dissolving around them. And Wren Calloway, 26 years old, junior tactical liaison, 4 months in the service, stood at the gallery glass of the Avantine and watched 2 ancient enemies come to a place they had both believed was death, because her ship had gone there first and refused to die. A hail came in, and it was on the open broadcast, and it was Warlord Vaughn, and his old dry voice was not speaking to the Avantine this time. It was speaking to the coalition ship across the corridor. Fleet speaker call, said the warlord. In 11 years I have never spoken your name to your face. I find I do not know how to begin, so I will begin the way the stranger did, plainly. I am tired. My dominion is tired. We have held this line until holding it became the only thing we knew how to do, and I do not remember any more what we thought we were protecting. I look across this corridor and I see a fleet as tired as mine, commanded by someone young enough to still remember believing a war should end. I am too old to remember that, so I will borrow your memory of it if you will lend it. Will you speak with me? Not through a wall, here, in the middle, where the stranger showed us we could stand. And Wren Calloway's young, clear voice came back across the dark, and it was not proud now, only weary and something like hopeful, which on a commander who had held her pride for 3 years was almost the same as tears. "I will speak with you, warlord," she said. "I have wanted to for longer than I have been willing to admit. I did not know how to be the one to say it first." A pause. "It seems neither of us did. It took someone who did not care which of us said it first, because it was never their war to lose." A longer pause. "Captain Mar, are you listening?" "I am Fleet Speaker," said Mar. "You said you did not care what story we told our peoples," said Wren Calloway. "You said we could blame you, the human who forced the corridor open, the stranger who left us no choice." Her voice steadied. "I do not think I will tell that story. I think I will tell the true one. I think I will tell my people that for 11 years 2 fleets stood across a wall that was made of nothing but the fear of being the first to stop, and that one day a ship came that was afraid of nothing, and it walked into the middle of us and stood there and would not die, and it broke our best trap and then spared the men inside it, and it asked us, one young commander to another, whether we still believed a war was supposed to end. And I think I will tell them that I found I still did." A breath. "That is a better story than blaming a stranger, and it has the virtue of being what happened." "It is a better story," Mar agreed, and Wren heard, for the first time in 4 months, something in her captain's voice that was not perfectly controlled. "Tell that one, Fleet Speaker. Tell it well, and Warlord, tell it too. The two of you have a great deal to say to each other, and none of it needs us any more. We came to open a door. The door is open. What you build on the other side of it is yours, and it should be yours, and we would only be in the way." She straightened. "The Avantine will withdraw. We will leave the corridor the way we entered it, slowly in the open, so that everyone who watched us come can watch us go, and understand that we took nothing from this place except the wall. The corridor is yours again, both of yours. Do better with it than a wall." The Avantine turned, one last slow turn, and began to move out of the silence corridor, and behind it the 2 flagships of the 2 exhausted powers drew closer together in the center that had killed everything for 11 years and now killed nothing, and began the long, hard, halting work of remembering how to be at peace. Wren stayed at the gallery glass as the corridor slid away behind them. She watched the 2 arcs of ships, Wren and Coalition, with their cold weapons, their commanders meeting in the middle, the drifting disabled cruiser full of living Wren who would go home and tell what they had seen. She watched Kel 9, the little Wren sensor station, slide past on the flank, and wondered about the officer aboard it who had almost fired 3 times and had not, and hoped she was resting easier now than she had been that morning. Captain Mar came to stand beside her one last time. "You'll be asked about this," Mar said. "For the rest of your life. You were on the bridge of the Avantine the day it crossed the silence corridor. People will want to know what it was like, what you felt." She looked at Wren, not at the corridor. "What will you tell them?" Wren thought about it. She thought about the locks forming and dissolving, the ship turning against all the laws of its own size, the 100 torpedoes shattering against a hull that would not flinch, the old warlord's voice cracking open on a private beam, the proud young Fleet Speaker ordering her weapons cold in front of her enemy, the 2 flagships crossing toward each other through a dark that had been death an hour before. "I'll tell them I was afraid," Wren said slowly. "The whole time. I was afraid from the moment we crossed the line to the moment the Second Fleet stood down. I'll tell them that because I think it matters." She turned to look at her captain. "And I'll tell them that the ship wasn't. That whatever the corridor believed about itself, whatever the wall was made of, it broke against a ship that had decided, all the way down, not to be afraid of it. and that once one thing in the whole corridor stopped being afraid, everything else remembered that it could stop too. She looked back out at the receding dark. I think that's what we really were, Captain, not the biggest guns in the sector. The first thing in 11 years that wasn't afraid, standing in the middle where everyone could see it, until the fear ran out of places to hide. Mar was quiet for a long moment. Then she put a hand on the young officer's shoulder, briefly, the only time she ever would. That's the truest thing anyone said today, she said, and you're the one who said it. Remember that too. She turned to go back to her seat. Take us home, liaison. Log the corridor as open, and log that no one died aboard the Avantine today. She paused at the foot of the dais and looked back, and that we opened a peace between two peoples who had forgotten it was allowed, and that we did it without firing a single shot we did not have to, and that we chose, when it counted, to spare more than we struck. Log all of it. It's the kind of thing that's worth writing down. Wren logged it. Her hands were steady. Behind the Avantine asterisk, in the center of the corridor that no longer had a name worth fearing, the two flagships met at last, and the long silence of the silence corridor ended, not with a shot, but with two tired commanders finally, after 11 years, beginning to speak. And ahead of the human flagship, the open dark of the corridor's edge widened into free space, and beyond it the amber sun and the drowned blue giant burned on like coals at the edge of a fire that someone, at long last, had let go out. The corridor stayed open. It never closed again.